on our different channels and make that recording available. So let's take a look at our agenda today. What are we going to be covering? We'll first talk about H5P, a quick little primer on what it is. I'm sure most of you are already familiar with it. We'll do an intro of LibreStudio, a bit of a tour there, and and then we'll get into more of a workshop. We'll start to create some interactive content. We'll focus on creating interactive multimedia, then we'll create interactive formative assessments, and we'll see kind of where the differences and where the strengths of H5P lies in both of those kind of initiatives. And then we'll take a look at some of the more advanced or upcoming features of LibreStudio, including collections. We'll take a look at our roadmap. Of course, we have plenty of time for questions and everything else. So feel free, again, just to interrupt me, throw it into the chat or what have you, your questions or anything like that. So let's get into it. What is H5P? Very, very simply, with H5P, you can create interactive HTML5 multimedia assets that are reusable, remixable. That's essentially the bottom line of what H5P can do. Obviously, there's a lot more going on back there to make that actually happen, but I won't get into the specifics of that. If you are interested in those concepts, I welcome you to go visit h5p.org, h5p.com. I'm throwing the links into the chat for you. Oh, and I should also throw the link to this slide in the chat as well. You can create lots of different interactive content using H5P. I like to consider essentially two overlapping categories of the content types for H5P. One I like to call multimedia, and one I like to call assessment. The key difference here is that assessments have, let's call them grades, whereas multimedia assets or multimedia content types don't always have grades. They can, in some cases, actually include grades, but that's not what they're built for, essentially. So when we're talking about multimedia content types, we're talking about things like charts, interactive videos, presentations, image sliders, and so on. When we talk about assessments, we're talking about actual question elements, and we'll get into examples of all the different types of content that's available in these two categories. What kind of content can you create? Again, this is a large discussion, so I won't get into the specifics. There are over 50 content types available in LibreStudio. You can learn more about each of them on h5p.org. I've shared the link in the chat there for your own reading at your own pace. A couple other things to consider when you're creating H5P. H5P is always changing. There's always new features, new content types, fixes to certain problems that exist. And so when you're choosing the content type that you want to create or the sort of interactives that you want to create, you should take into consideration essentially 4 things, more than 4 things, but these are the key things I would imagine. One of them is being accessibility. Some content types are much more accessible than others. You'll notice in Studio, we actually have an indication, visual indication of how accessible the content type you're using is. And we planned on improving that feature in the future, but we'll take a look at some of, we'll take a look at that feature specifically shortly. There are always new H5P content types. We'd like to think of LibreStudio as kind of like a stable sandbox. So we're always going to implement the newest content types as soon as they're available for you to test, meaning that in some cases you may be testing content types that are not fully fleshed out, fully accessible yet. And so that's something to be aware of. Again, we encourage experimentation. It's a way to actually learn the best ways of using H5Ps just to actually test it out. So don't just stick to one content type, try them all out. Again, there are over 50, so it's quite a bit to experiment with. Lastly, you're going to be able to find H5P in Studio and other places that you can easily reuse and remix. I'll get into some examples of where you can pull that content from. But this is one of the kind of great features of H5P is that it is portable. It is encapsulated, so you can create an H5P element or an H5P resource, and somebody can just take that H5P and use it somewhere else and remix it in a way that makes sense to them. And so because that's one of the superpowers of H5P, we'll get into some examples of that later on as well. So with that, I think it's time to jump into an introduction of LibreStudio. There are, if you want to visit LibreStudio, there's the URL. I'll throw that into the chat. We'll do a demo shortly as well. There are currently over 6,000 openly shared H5P resources in Studio. Over 200 educators have created accounts and are actively contributing content into the repository. LibreStudio itself is a repository or a hub, if you will, or platform that allows educators like yourselves to create, remix, share H5P. It's free for all LibreNet members, and it's built with open source technologies. LibreStudio itself will be distributed as an open source platform, so any school organization will be able to essentially build their own studio. Studio is built in a partnership with Learnful Labs here in Canada. So once we get into the demo, you can register for an account, or you can just simply follow along. If you feel like registering for an account, here is the registration code that you'll need to use. I'll throw it into the chat. And so with that, let's actually get into a demo. So I'm on studio.libretext.org. This is the homepage. You can see I'm not logged in. You'll notice that the site is actually fairly usable, fairly open to anybody who even doesn't have an account. But if you want to actually start creating, remixing, and reusing content, you do need to register for an account. We'll take a look at what the registration page looks like. You click on register, you'll have your display name, your institution, organization, your email address, again, your institutional email address preferably, and your registration code. I already have an account, so I'm just going to log in. Once you're logged in, you're directed to your profile. From your profile, you'll be able to see. Can I share my screen? Can you guys not see my screen anymore?
You're not in presentation mode. We're looking at your.
Oh, whoops. Okay, sorry about that. Let me just go into. My apologies. Let me just go back forward here. So just rewinding a little bit. If we're not logged into LibreStudio, we can still view the catalog of resources and still use the search features. We can browse by subject, and we can take a look at collections and so on and so forth. So the contents within the repository itself are visible even if you're not logged in. But the power, obviously, to create and to remix content, you need to have a registered account. Registering an account is fairly simple. Provide your name, your institution, your email address, and the registration code that I shared in the chat. You'll be able to log in with your account once you've registered. So I already have an account. I'm going to log in here. Once you log in, you're directed to your profile. Your profile is a public place or a publicly facing profile, I should say, in that anybody that views your that finds a link to your profile will be able to see the content you've shared in your profile. We can always go back to our profile by just clicking on the author menu, hitting my profile. Let's take a look at some of these other pages real quick. We have a dashboard for my H5P. When I go to this page, I will see all the H5P that I've created, whether this is publicly shared in the library or just privately kind of created for myself. I'll be able to see all my H5P and edit the H5P directly in here. You can also see my collections if I have any. We'll get into what collections are very shortly. And of course, if I've bookmarked any content within Studio, I'll be able to see my bookmarks and manage my bookmarks directly from here. So let's get into the home page. When we click on LibreStudio or browse all, we'll get into the library itself. From the library, we can filter by subject. So I might be looking for perhaps biology or chemistry content. You can filter by tags, and we'll get into how tags work shortly as well. If I'm looking for a specific author or content that I've shared personally in the library, we can search from here. We can also search for keyword, which searches for a keyword in the title and the description and some other fields. Like we mentioned, there are over 50 different content types in H5P, and so you can filter by content type in here. So I might be looking for interactive videos, for instance, and so on and so forth. We'll just leave that blank for now. Or we can filter by license. So maybe we only want content that has a Creative Commons license, and so on and so forth. We can also browse by subject. Subjects will hopefully turn into more like domains or groups and have some social features in the future. Can you hide material? So we have a question here. Can you hide material that you are working on before people see it or before you share it? Absolutely. And we'll get into that very shortly. Once we go through subjects, we can go into a specific subject and take a look at the content that's been shared there. These are still very rough and have to be worked out, but we'll take a look at a roadmap of what subjects and domains might look like in the future. Finally, we can browse by collections. Collections can be considered lists or libraries or playlists, if you will, of H5P that are created and shared by other educators like yourself. So I might create a list on, mathematics for high school students or level 1 biology courses, and so on and so forth. And the list that I create, the collection I create, can be content either I've created or content I've sourced in the LibreStudio library itself. So that's kind of a bird's eye view of how all of that works. Let's go back into our presentation here and jump into our workshop portion. We're going to be creating some H5P. Specifically, we're going to create an interactive medium, and we're going to create a formative assessment. Let's go into creating interactive media here. Our goals are to create a course presentation, create slides with text and images, and we're going to create a slide with a quiz. We're going to use tags, or we're going to add tags to this specific H5P resource, and then we're going to embed this resource in our LMS. So let's go back into Studio. When we want to create new H5P, there's a button here at the top, new H5P. From here, you can see, I'll start on the right-hand side. We have a subject. So these are the different topics or domains that overall domains or overall subjects, if you will, that our content is about. So for instance, maybe I want to do one on biology. We can add tags, and we'll get into that shortly. We can provide an overview. This is for other instructors, educators, designers who see my content and perhaps want to reuse it in their own works. This might be just a description about the pedagogical aspects of this resource, if you will. Down here at the bottom right, we also have options and settings here for visibility. We can make this content private, which it kind of by default already is, or we can include in the portfolio, or sorry, in our profile, or we can include it in the library. By default, when we create new content, it is not going to be shared in our profile. It's not going to be shared in the library. So really anybody with a link, anybody who knows what the link is will be able to view it. And so in that sense, it is hidden to everybody except ourselves. If we wanted to hide it to everybody, only people who are logged in and know the link, then we can set it to private. And we'll get into what this setting does very shortly. Let's just jump in. We'll create let's take a look at the H5P content editor, if you will. When we get here, we have an option to create different types of content. We can see there are 52 different content types available to us. If we want to just take a look at what each of these content types are, we can hit the details button and learn more about that content type. You can see an example here, screenshots, or we can click on the read more button, or sorry, the content demo button, which will take us to h5p.org, and we can see some examples of this content. Likewise, if you're ever interested in a content type, but you don't know how other educators are using it, my advice would be to just go back into Browse All. Under type, I would search for that content type. So I think it was called dialogue. Oops, dialogue cards. It's my Canadian spelling there. That's so when I search for dialogue cards, it's going to bring up all the dialogue cards that have been shared in the library. And I can even go a little bit deeper here, perhaps. So we can see that there are 75 dialogue cards. And we can say, maybe I want to look at dialogue cards that are part of the biology subject or biology domain. Doesn't look there are any there. So I think they were all in medicine, nursing, and nutrition. At least 41 of them were. And so from here, I can see how other educators are using this content. You can get a sense of how they put this content together. I can also add this content to my bookmarks, so I can always refer back to it if I need to. You'll also notice that I get information about, the license, when it was created, when it was last updated, is it shared in the library? Are there any tags associated with it? We get the information about the accessibility. If I click on this information, I get some details about this content type, dialogue cards. How accessible is it? What are some of the issues that I might run into, and some of the some tips on what to do about those issues. And so it's always important to kind of read this information and make sure that you're aware of some of the traps, if there are any, regarding accessibility. You can also see who the author of this content is. I'll click on their name and be taken to their profile. In this case, this user doesn't have any content shared on their profile, but perhaps I want to talk to them about that specific content they had created. I can always just hit the contact button if they've enabled it, and send a message to them. We plan on having a lot more social features, but that's the beginning of it at the moment. Anywho, back to creating new content. So I'm going to click on the new H5P, and I want to create a course presentation. I will start searching for course, and I know that this is the content type I want to use. So I'll hit the button there. I can always view more tutorials on this content type, or I can view more examples on this content type. Both those links go to h5p.org. And from here, we can actually start building our H5P out. I already have a Word document here, so I'm just going to title and course presentation titled How to Get an A in My Class. You'll notice that I have some content, some images already kind of laid out per slide. This is my recommendation on how to approach building kind of longer form content, if you will. You probably want to spell it out first and then go from there. So from here, I give my H5P a title. I'm going to have to do that for every H5P that I create. And then in slides, I can create, text, links, images, shapes, videos, etc., including questions right in my slide itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a text slide. Now, one thing I recommend doing, you'll notice that there's this button here looks like an arrow that's pointing diagonally. When you hover over it, it says enter full screen. I always recommend hitting that button when you're just creating content. It will give you the full screen. It will take advantage of the full screen that you have available, so you can easily kind of manage this content. So we'll just leave that as is for now. So we created one slide. We're going to add a new slide here. We'll add an image. We'll upload an image. Of course, I'm not going to be able to find. When we upload an image, we can also add metadata to that image directly so that anybody that comes in and uses our, remixes our H5P will be able to see that information and make a decision on whether or not the licensing works for them for their specific use. And obviously, we always want to provide the alternative text. For now, I'll just cheat. Yes, absolutely. And this is a really important, if you are using images from other sources, images that you have not created yourself, then it's imperative that you actually provide the meta tags there to make sure that your entire H5P asset is actually compliant with the way that content needs to be attributed, essentially. So we have our image and we have our first content. I'll just copy paste this content in. Not sure what's happening here. It looks like we got a bit of, oh no, and that just deleted all my work. Anyway, it doesn't look like it's going to work for me right now. But the general idea is that when we create content, we can, okay, so that worked. Okay, now it's working. My apologies, a little bit of technical issues there. Okay, so when we're in the full screen, for some reason, it doesn't like to show us the text. So it's a little bit of a bug that we've just discovered. We'll just ignore that for now. And I'm not sure why some of these are just not. It's always nice when you're providing a demo, that's when the bugs come out. You'll notice that any aspect, any content, whether it's an image or a text or a link, we can always provide the metadata for that element that we're adding to our slides or our content. So in the case of slides, I've just created this text block, but when I go into edit it, when I double click on it, you'll notice that I have the option to add metadata to this text. So if the source of this content is somewhere else, it's not myself, then I can always attribute that source directly in here. Select the appropriate license and the name and so on and so forth, including the source of where I got it from. So that's one of the really neat things about H5P is that we can actually attribute at a very granular level. So we have our first slide there. Let's go ahead and add another slide. And actually what I'm going to do is I'll go back into my first slide. I'm going to just clone the slide and just replace the text directly in here. Double click on the image, remove the file and replace it with my second image. You'll notice that when you double click, that does open up the edit window for that element. So it's a quick way of kind of really quickly putting together some slides. We have another issue here. I was trying to follow along and got this message. No, trying to access no, go ahead and continue on. That's a strange error. I'm not sure exactly what's happened there. but don't worry that you're going to break anything there. Everything is backed up and so on. So feel free to truck on. And then if the problem persists, please let us know. Yeah, sorry. It's always with demos that when things break. We have another question here from Deborah. Are certain images that systems like trying not to upload JPEG and it's not allowing, trying to upload a JPEG and it's not allowing it? Interesting. I don't think there should be any restrictions on uploading a JPEG. I think what I'm uploading here actually are JPEGs. So make sure that the file extension is JPG. In some cases, when you download an image from Google, for instance, from Google Search or something like that, it doesn't actually download an image. It downloads, well, it downloads an image, but it's a different type of image format, which is not, I guess, not kosher with H5P just yet. I think they're called WebP or something. It's a Google specific image file format. We have another question here from Anna. If we make a chart that needs an extended description that wouldn't fit in the alt text, what would be the best place to include that? In LibreTexts, I use the link to the description page. Yeah, that's a perfect example of some of the limitations, if you will, of H5P and really just images and web media in general. If you have an image like a table or some sort of illustration that requires a really long description, H5P doesn't allow you to extend beyond, I forget exactly what the limitation here, maybe 128 characters. So what I like to do, and I think you're doing exactly the right thing, just include a link to somewhere else where they can get that information. And one thing that you could do always is where you have your H5P embedded, you can always have another, let's call it a paragraph that describes the image above. And that might be the easiest solution going forward. There are talks about making H5P accommodate more long descriptions and more accessible kind of features like that, but that's still a ways away. All right, so we got two slides here. We got two images. We're going to clone this slide again, but this time we're just going to leave the image and put in a multiple choice question. And so at the bottom here, we do have our questions. Are you ready to get an A in this class is the title of our multiple choice questions here. Our first question is, where can I find the latest announcements from my professor? Is it my WhatsApp group? Is it on TikTok? We'll add some more options here. Email, or perhaps in the LMS. And the LMS is the correct answer here, so we're just going to select correct. You'll notice underneath each of the question answers, we do have this tips and feedback. We'll get into how to make the best use of that very shortly. And so we'll just go ahead and hit done here. And now we have kind of a self-assessment check, if you will, within our presentation itself. Well, let me just finish off this content type. Just go ahead and hit save. So now we have this, we have our presentation. We can see that it's reusable for anybody that wants to remix it. You can see that it's embeddable because for us to be able to embed it somewhere else. You can also see that it's not shared in the library. So when we go into the LibreStudio, this is not something that's going to show up on this giant list. But if we ever wanted to edit it or to make modifications, we can always go into our author menu, my H5P, and we can see that course presentation that we just created. And so from here, what we could do is we can launch our LMS. And in my case, I'm using D2L Brightspace. Your LMS might be different, but the concept is exactly the same. We'll go and create a page, or we'll go into our table of contents in this case. In the introduction, we're going to create a new, in this case, they call it a file, which is essentially an HTML page or HTML file, if you will. And what we're going to do is we're going to just embed. I think there's an option here, embed code. Enter embed code. What we've done is we hit the embed button here. We've copy pasted this text, all of it, all the text that's in that frame there, into our embed code. When we hit insert, it's going to ask us, do we trust this site? We'll say allow. And we're just going to say insert. And so now we have our slideshow course presentation that has the interactives. And it's a little bit better than, let's just say, asking students to, at least in my experience, telling them to just go and read the syllabus, or making this a really long announcement with like blah, 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 blah. Each of the tips have their own page, if you will. And, we can add quizzes in here to make sure that students are understanding the concepts. We can provide feedback when they, make this kind of like a fun little game, provide feedback when they get the wrong answers, and just be like, hey, you're not going to get an A in this class because, you're not ready, or so on and so forth. But you get the general idea. The nice thing is, when we've embedded this content into our LMS, it's not like we have to ever modify that embed code now. We just have to, or the code that's or the content that's inside that LMS page. All we really have to do is make modifications to our H5P content itself, such as adding more slides, and that change is immediately reflected on the LMS as well. We have a question here. I find the feature of LMS integration of LibreTexts is coming soon. When would this feature be available? Currently, there is a integration via another LibreText product called Adapt. And Adapt is a homework system. It's a summative homework system. And you can get integration into, at least from what I understand, Canvas, and Delmar can probably talk more about it. Integration for LibreStudio itself into the LMS, that is something on the roadmap, but we haven't actually put down hard dates or anything like that. Another comment from Anna. I know our college doesn't pay for H5P LMS integration. Will it still work to embed? Yes, you don't need to pay for the integration. You can still embed the content, any H5P content, into your LMS pages. Just basically copy paste this link here, and you'll be able to, on your LMS, on your web pages, basically anywhere that can accept an iframe, you'll be able to embed. Any other questions about what we've seen so far?
I should mention that if you embed it in that way, you're going to be using it formatively through the pages on the LMS, not summatively. So the students doing the problems are not going to couple their scores into the LMS's gradebook. In order to do that right now, you have to go through Adapt. Although, as Yasin mentioned, we've had discussions in terms of trying to make a direct LibreStudio to LMS integration procedure.
Thank you. Yeah. So definitely what we're talking about right now is, yeah, as Delmar mentioned, formative assessment. And in this case, it's not really even assessment. It's self-checking, self-progress checks. So this sort of stuff is very safe to put into the LMS. And to go back to Anna's question, you can embed this content right now into your LMS without any issue. But yeah, it won't be attached to any gradebook or anything like that. That is in the future, hopefully. Back into our slides here. So we talked about creating interactive media. I think, course presentation is just one content type that you can create. You can do interactive videos, interactive images, hotspots, all sorts of different sort of options are available to you. But one thing I'm noticing is that a lot of folks, they want to create interactive assessment. And like we've been talking about, what we're going to be demonstrating should only be considered ready for formative assessment. And what we mean by that is nothing that is actually tied to real grades. So our goals for this specific initiative here, what we're going to do is we're going to create a question set. We're going to modify the metadata for that question set. We'll add question feedback. We'll embed this quiz into our textbook, our LibreTexts textbook, to see how that works. And we'll modify the quiz to become more, in quotations, summative, in that it will look and feel like a summative question within a formative context, if you will. So let's take a look at creating a new, we're going to create a new H5P element. We're going to search for question set. You'll notice that there are lots of, we can create single choice questions, we can create multiple choice questions. Question set allows you to create all those different question types directly within one single multi-question quiz of sorts. We start off by giving our quiz a title. Just be very basic and just call it quiz number 1. From here, we have options to select the question type we want to add. Multiple choice, drag and drop, fill in the blanks, mark the words, drag the words, true or false, essay. Lots of options there. One thing, again, I recommend before you jump into any one of those question types, just to take a look at how people are using those question types elsewhere. So if I do a search for, I think one of them was drag the words. I'll do a search for that. I can see some examples here. I can see a great example from Angela Chen, geosciences, and we can take a look at how this interaction is supposed to work when we start creating our own drag the words question. You'll notice that we have a show solutions, we have a retry button, and so on and so forth. I think we get the general concept here. So when we're creating our new H5P, it's nice to have at least an understanding of how each of the available content types work, just to make our lives a little bit easier. So back into our new H5P here, we're going to create a quiz. We'll do multiple choice because this is the easiest one to demo. Back into my Word document, I had some questions sorted out. And again, I've sourced these questions from other folks who have shared their content, just for an example here. And just to make life a little bit easier, I'm just going to provide 2 options. Now you'll notice when I'm creating quiz questions, I have the option to select which one is correct. And in this case, it's this one. You'll also notice that I have the option to provide tips and feedback. So a tip will display, let's just add this. This is an example of a tip. We'll see what that looks like to the student when we include that. What I like to set is this message displayed if the answer is selected on the incorrect options. So if the student selects this this answer, and in this case it is the incorrect answer, What I usually like to do for my questions is just say something like to the effect of, review very simply, like, review chapter, X section 5, whatever it is. And I might provide like a page number, just or even a link, if it's a digital textbook, to where this concept is essentially presented to the student. I also like to do the same thing for, in some cases, for when they select the correct answer. If they select the correct answer, to say something to the effect of, okay, so you get this concept, but have you considered this other concept? And so on and so forth. So it's a little bit more difficult to write feedback for when they select the correct answer, but I find that it's a good way to kind of get them thinking about the next concepts. We can also provide feedback on the range, the grade range, if you will. So we can add a new range. So between 0 and 50, we can provide feedback. So if we had multiple questions, we can provide feedback in this case, or between 50 and 100, we can provide feedback there. And we'll get into, this is a little bit more advanced stuff. So if you had an actual quiz, this is probably where I'd spend a little bit more time fleshing that up. And we can continue to add questions here. So we have one multiple choice question. We can add another multiple choice question. I'll just copy paste this in again. I found it very intuitive to enter multiple choice questions. I love the simple design. Yeah, it's very, compared to some of the LMS features or some of the LMS quiz builders, I find H5P, it does take a little bit of time to kind of get your bearings, but once you kind of get into it, it does flow really, really well. So we've gone ahead, we've created a quiz with 2 questions. Both of them are multiple choice questions. One thing I'd recommend is that you add metadata to your questions. So in this case, I'm going to say, perhaps this is a CC BY. I'll provide my full name here. I can be an author, editor, licensor, what have you. I'll just save that. I'll save the metadata. And so this is for the overall quiz. Now I can also add metadata to every specific question. So perhaps I got this question from somewhere else. And from here, I would need to bring, if they haven't already provided licensing, then I would need to, I would need to bring in their licensing attribution here. So for instance, if I grab this from a textbook that already existed, something like OpenStax, I would probably need to attribute where I got that question from. We have another question here. Is there any way to automate the cut and paste for multiple choice so you don't have to paste every choice one by one? That's a great question. If the content already exists, you can copy the entire multiple choice. And we'll actually do a demo of that very shortly once we save this. And we'll leave everything as is for now. We'll just go ahead, hit save. So now we have our question set with the 2 questions. You'll notice that the first thing we'll notice here, there's our tip. If you remember, we added a tip to one of the answers. If I click on that, it will show the tip. So whatever I typed into that tip box, that's what will be provided to the student. If we check our answers, you'll notice that our feedback that we provided for when that incorrect answer is selected will also show. We also have the option, or the student has the option, because we've left it enabled, to retry the question. And you'll notice that they get a really nice animation there. They can go to the next question, check that, and then they have an option to finish. And then from there, they'll see their results for the overall quiz, which included 2 questions in this case. Now, what we might want to do is embed this content. So I'm just going to, again, copy the embed URL. I'm going to go into, whoops, chemistry. I'm going to log in. From here, I'm going to go to my sandbox. And this might be different for you. I do have admin access, so it's a little bit more stuff to see here. And from here, perhaps the page I want to modify is this page here. Click on edit. Now there's a few different ways you can get H5P, into your book. The way I like to do it, simply for myself, is I'll just create a new paragraph, a new space where I want my H5P to exist. And I might give this a title like hands-on activity and quiz. I might set this heading to something like H3 or whatever makes sense in the semantics of this specific page. And what I would do is I would just hit the HTML button. And then from here, I'll find that empty paragraph and I'll just hit paste and paste in my iframe code. And when I go back into Visual Editor, I can see my H5P showing right there.
Yasin, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but there's a template that's add H5P under templates to avoid having to go into the HTML and such.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's what I was going to go into next.
Okay.
The other way you can do it, as Delmar mentioned, when you go into Elements, hit Templates. I'm going to wait for a second for this to load, and we're going to find H5P. Query H5P. We'll insert the template. And then from here, we're going to select the ID of our H5P. To get the ID for our H5P, we can just go back into our H5P page, and we'll notice that we have every H5P comes with an ID, in this case 7223. And I'll just paste that where it says 1, and that's all I really have to do. So if we go ahead and hit save on this page, we do have now the same element twice. The nice thing about the template is that it provides you with a heading and all that other interesting stuff. And you don't have to create your own headings, but they're essentially the same. The same thing is happening in the back end. And again, the nice thing is because of the way that H5P works, I don't need to modify that embed code ever again. I just need to modify my quiz. So if I want to continue adding questions here, I can just edit my resource and continue adding questions here. The embed code never needs to change here, but the content will automatically display the latest iteration of the quiz itself. Just go back into the slides, make sure I'm not forgetting anything. So we talked about metadata, we talked about question feedback, we talked about embedding the quiz. And again, you can also embed this quiz in your LMS as well. So I'm just going to copy this embed code back into my LMS on this page again. Just going to create a new line. And what I might do is find the embed code button. And just like that, we have our quiz on our LMS page. Again, this is formative. It's not tied to your gradebook in any sort of way. Any student who's savvy enough will be able to find the right question, or sorry, to find the right answers. And obviously in this case, we're providing the solutions to the student anyway. You can see when we hit the show solution button, it will tell us what the right question is. So again, not for only for formative, not for summative. We have another question here. If I created flashcards, how would I insert them into my Canvas class? Or would I just give my students the URL to access the flashcode? So it's a great question. Flashcodes will work exactly the same way as any other H5P. So let's just go ahead and find some flashcode here, or sorry, flashcards. So here's a flashcard. You'll notice that at the bottom of the H5P itself, there's an embed button. Authors have the ability to turn this off. So there might be some cases where the embed button is not available, or because the author has turned it off. But I think in most cases, you'll find that the embed button is available. I just have to copy the iframe code. And then in my LMS, every LMS implementation is going to be a little bit different in terms of where you find the place to paste your embed code. I'm not too familiar with Canvas, to be completely honest, but I imagine there's going to be kind of a source code page or something like that as well. Worst case scenario, you can always just paste in the iframe code into here if you don't have an embed code button like this implementation of Brightspace. And so when I hit save there, I can just hit save and close. And now that flashcard is also available to my students directly in here. And really, it's going to be any H5P that's shared openly inside of Studio. All right, so we wanted to talk about one other thing here, is making our quizzes a little bit more summative-esque, if you will. So you'll notice the problem here is it's not so much a problem, but in some cases I'm noticing that if you want to use your quizzes, your quiz questions in Adapt or something like that, what I'd recommend is you make some of these changes that I'm going to demonstrate. First thing we want to do is we want to remove whoops, I have to get the wrong answer. You want to remove the show solutions and the retry button. And we want to remove perhaps, this final kind of show solutions and the retry buttons there as well. So we're going to go back into edit the page or edit the resource. We're going to scroll down and we're going to have some options to change the behavior of our H5P. One thing we might want to do, make our quizzes a little bit more summative-esque, is to disable backward navigation. Perhaps we want to randomize the question order. So the students, when they're looking at their screen, it's all different order. And perhaps we only want to show one question at a time. Other things we want to do is we don't want to display the results. We don't want to, well, perhaps we still want to display results, but we don't want to have the solution shown or allow retries. Lastly, we don't want to show the check buttons. And just disabling that means that the show solutions and the retry buttons are all disabled as well. So let's go ahead and make those changes. We'll hit save. And you'll notice that we only get one question at a time. We can't navigate. We can't go backwards or forwards. So I have to try and answer this question. Oh, never mind. So we changed something here. So it's only going to show one question. Never mind. I thought that was how many questions, but I guess we've disabled the backwards navigation anyway. So when you'll notice that we can't go forward and we can't navigate forward or backward in this case. When we answer a question, we don't get feedback right away, whether we got it right or wrong. And we can continue answering questions. We'll see the finish button, but we'll see our result, but not feedback on whether we got one question right or the other question wrong. Obviously, this kind of defeats the purpose a little bit for formative assessment, or defeats the purpose fully for formative assessment. But in some cases, if you're just looking for kind of a more of a quiz-like element where perhaps you're going to reuse some questions from from your midterms or your quizzes or your exams and of such, this might be one way to do that. We have a couple of questions here. Is there a way to speed up bringing quiz in QTI format into, besides copy pasting each individual field? Yes, so let's take a look at this. And let me just read the next question here. Sorry, but I lost somewhere, but how can I access the LibreText textbook editing page you just showed us? So from here, LibreText, you have to log in. Once you go to whichever library you're a part of, you'll see a login button. Once you sign in, you'll be able to access your sandbox or any of the textbooks that you're creating. And then from there, you'll be able to start building out your textbooks. I believe, and Delmar can correct me if I'm wrong, but access to the library, the textbook builders for LibreText, they're only available to LibreNet members. So that might be one way, one of the things that you need access to.
I'm sorry, my internet was a little shaky there. Can you repeat that again?
The question was how to access LibreText textbooks, to create textbooks in LibreText in the library. And from what I understand, it's only for LibreNet members, right?
No, it's available to anyone who wants it. It's just that if we have more than 5 books per campus, then we want the campus to be part of the LibreNet. Otherwise, everyone can create their own books and customize using all the resources that you just discussed.
Perfect. Okay, so that might be something you want to reach out to. Is there an email address, Delmar, that people can send an email to?
Yeah, if they send an email to info@libretext.org or register@libretext.org. Sorry, I'm rephrase that. If you go to register.libretext.org, that's a website that you request an account that we will then ask you to do, even if you send us an email directly. There you go. That's exactly it.
Perfect. To answer Anna's question here, is there a way to speed up bringing a quiz in QTI format into H5P beyond copying and pasting each individual field? Unfortunately, this is only possible if the question already exists in some sort of format. So let's say, sorry, in an H5P format already. Unfortunately, you do have to copy paste each question and answer individually if you're creating the question from scratch. But if, let's say, there's a multiple, if I can learn to type, multiple choice question that you find in Studio, such as this one, and I want to reuse this question in my own question set. What I can do is I can hit the reuse button. Oh no, it's not going to let me do that, is it? Yeah, that's not going to work. Oops, sorry, I lied about that as well. I don't know if it's just this one or if it's just, because typically what will happen is there's a copy button. I'm not seeing that. Oh no, yeah, so never mind. So one thing we could do, so let's say this was a question that I wanted to use. What I would do is I would just download this as an H5P file. And I would create new H5P. Instead of creating from scratch, what I would do is I would say upload. And then I would go and select that H5P content that I just downloaded. And upload it here. I'll hit use. Thanks so much, Anna. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. Thanks for joining. And so what I've done is I've uploaded that H5P. I have now access to all the questions. And I can essentially start to remix this content in a way that makes sense to myself. You notice that all the metadata information comes through as well, the author's name, the licensing, so I don't need to worry about any of that. I also have access to the question itself, the answers, any feedback information, any of that was provided by the author. And so what I can do from here is I can say, well, I want to copy all the content that's in here. I'm not going to necessarily save this just yet. I just want to copy everything. And then I'm going to go back into the quiz I was building. I'm going to edit this quiz. And we're going to add a question. And we're just going to hit the paste button now. Instead of selecting the question type, we're just going to say paste. And that's going to paste in the question that I just copied after I had uploaded it, including, again, all the metadata and so on and so forth. And so now that question is available as a question, is now added as a question into my, as you can see here, into my question set. So that's one way to kind of bring in content from other places into your own H5P. So I don't know if we set an actual time for this, but I'm just going to run through a couple things real quick. One thing that we're really excited about is collections. So within LibreStudio, you can create collections, almost like mini libraries or playlists. We can take a look at a collection here. Notice that this collection has a description, it has a subject, and then it has two sub-collections. It has an assessment collection and then an interactive media collection. And we can see all the different H5P inside of these collections. We can hit this button to get a preview of what that H5P looks like, the author, etc. And we can continue doing that to check out each of the different sort of H5P elements that are saved into this collection. We can also start to bookmark H5P that we like, that we find in these collections as well. But basically, the idea of collections is that we can start to build out our own library, our own playlists of collections. To do that, we just hit the new collection button. We give our collection a title. We're going to ignore this first resources and collection. That's legacy. That's going to be removed eventually. And we focus on this collections element here. From here, we can optionally provide a name or title or for our subsection of collection in this collection. But we're going to leave that blank for now. When we click on select resources, from here we can see resources that I've created, or when you're logged in, you'll see your own resources. We can also browse the library, filter and search from the library directly if we wanted to look for H5P directly in there. Or we can look at our bookmarks and see content that we bookmarked that we want to add perhaps to our collection here. And as we start to add a collection, we can provide some metadata, including the subject. We can include this in our library, include our profile. For now, we're just going to keep it as hidden, and we're going to go ahead and hit save. From here, now we have a collection of H5P that we can perhaps share with our other faculty members. Maybe it's just for ourselves. Maybe we create a list for our students. But the general idea is that we can create collections that include smaller libraries or smaller collections that we can share amongst, share within the collection of collections, if you will, the library of collections, or we can just use for our personal kind of organizational initiatives. Just going back into that collection we created, I'm going to go ahead and edit this collection. You'll notice that I can continue to add collections resources directly into this collection, or I can add a new sub collection. So I'm going to call this one, perhaps this is, chapter 1. Maybe that's how I want to split up my collections, or maybe it's by type of media. So maybe I want this to be maps. Maybe I want them to be videos. It's really up to you how you organize your collections out. But perhaps if from here, now I can start to select my resources, and I'll go into the library, and I want to search for videos in chemistry, let's say. you can see that we have a number of videos in chemistry that are available to us. Let's go ahead and add these in. When we save our collection now. Oh, so sorry, I'm just seeing the question now. Okay, I'll answer that question very shortly. But now when we take a look at our collection, we can see that it has these two sections, one that's unnamed and then another named sub-collection that's called videos. And it's just a number of videos in the chemistry domain. So from here, I can view each of the videos. I can again bookmark them, and yeah, I can share this collection with other folks, with my students, wherever it makes sense. And we do have lots of plans to make collections a little bit more perhaps appealing to students, to be able to have them be challenges, if you will, of sorts, or playlists, kind of like something like lynda.com or LinkedIn Learning, where it's just a series of videos that they can just automatically kind of sort through. But there's lots of different directions we can take collections there. And I'm just going to read this question by Bigona here. Flashcards, I may be too detailed or a program bug. I created a flashcard. The answer required the listing of 3 terms, but when I go to the flashcard and answer the question as if I were a student, I answered the question with the same 3 terms, but in different order as the original answer. It is still correct, but if it is marked wrong, I cannot find the option for this. Nothing happened. Okay. Let's see if we can find her. Doesn't look like it's been shared here. I will get back. I'll circle back to her directly once I take a look at that. Anyway, that's our kind of the workshop. I just want to kind of wrap up here because we are, I realize it's been over an hour already. I've been talking for too long. Finding H5P, there's going to be lots of different places where you can find H5P. One place to look is H5P Studio for eCampus. You'll notice that they also have a repository which you can search and filter for different H5P. There's also the Pressbooks directory. From here, you can look for different H5P in different books. You can see that there are, for instance, this one here, a digital workbook for, beginning ESOL. Click on that, there are 131 activities. We can take a look at each of these activities as well and reuse or embed them. And of course, there's initiative at Merlot to organize H5P efforts. And so here, this would be a great place to kind of keep your finger on the pulse on what's going on with H5P as well. In terms of the roadmap, what we're doing for Studio, we're working on better authoring experience, integrating the accessibility tips, guides, tutorials, training within Studio itself, and of course, better searching and filtering. We have a slew of collaboration tools that are coming your way, including commenting, reviewing, collaboration on H5P org collections, so being able to co-author essentially with your colleagues. We're also looking at perhaps groups or teams within the Studio infrastructure, and a way to kind of organize efforts around H5P OER. And of course, we're focused on the learning experience. We're thinking about analytics for question results, LMS integration via LTI, and having some sort of synchronous real-time sessions, if you will, that H5P can be a part of. We do have a community of practice. I'll share this link in the chat. Feel free to join our forum. We're going to be a lot more active on it with sharing updates and news. And of course, it's a great place to find support if you need it. So with that, again, my name is Yasin. You can reach me at yasin@libretext.org or ymdahi on Twitter. I leave the rest of the time for you folks to ask me any questions if you have any, or of course, just reach out to me anytime you'd like.
Thank you, Yasin. It's beautiful what you've put together in the last year in regard to this, and I really like a lot of the features that you've expressed. You've certainly been addressing questions as things have been going along. I'm not sure if anyone has any additional questions right now for Yasin. I think we have a handful of minutes before we can close out. Otherwise, like Yasin mentioned, feel free to contact him directly or the rest of the LibreTexts team at info@libretext.org, and we can certainly direct you to the appropriate person. Thank you.
Sure, I'll share the slides again. Here's the link to the slides. Feel free to jump in there anytime.